My daughter-in-law accidentally wrote in the family group. We don't need to invite your mom to the wedding. The old hag is just a burden. She didn't know I had paid for the venue. The surprise came on the day of the event. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Harold bought me for our 25th anniversary, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. At 66, I still wasn't completely comfortable with all this technology, but Larry had insisted I join so we could all stay connected. It'll be fun, Mom, he'd said with that smile that reminded me so much of his father. I picked up my reading glasses from the side table and squinted at the screen. The message was from Emilia, my daughter-in-law of 3 years. My heart always did a little flutter when I saw her name, hoping this time it might be something warm, something that showed she was finally accepting me into their family. Instead, I read words that felt like a physical blow to my chest. We don't need to invite your mother to the wedding planning meeting tomorrow. The old woman just causes trouble anyway. She'll probably want to change everything and make it about herself like she always does. The phone slipped from my trembling hands and clattered onto the hardwood floor. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The old woman. That's how she saw me. Not Virginia, not Larry's mother, not even by my name. Just the old woman who causes trouble. I bent to retrieve my phone, my arthritis making the movement more difficult than it should have been. The screen showed more messages flowing in from other family members, but I couldn't focus on them. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. 3 years. 3 years I've been trying to build a relationship with Emilia. 3 years of swallowing my pride when she made little comments about my cooking being too heavy, or my decorating style being outdated. 3 years of watching my son choose his wife's side in every disagreement, no matter how small. But this hurt more than all of that combined because it revealed what she really thought of me when she believed I couldn't hear. I walked to my kitchen and put the kettle on, my hands shaking as I reached for my favorite mug. The routine helped calm me, just like it had during all those difficult years after Harold passed. The steam rose from my tea as I sat at the small dining table, staring at the phone screen. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Emilia had no idea that I was the one who had made her dream wedding possible. 2 months ago, Larry had called me, his voice heavy with disappointment. Mom, we found the perfect venue for the wedding. The Riverside Manor, the one overlooking the lake? But they want $15,000 up front, and with Emilia's student loans and my mortgage. I had listened to my son's voice crack with frustration, remembering how Harold and I had scraped together every penny for our own modest wedding 42 years ago. We'd been so young, so hopeful, so sure that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. Don't worry, sweetheart, I had told Larry. Let me think about it. The next day, I had driven to the Riverside Manor myself. The coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia, had shown me around the grounds. The chapel overlooking the lake was breathtaking, with its stone arches and stained glass windows catching the afternoon light. The reception hall had crystal chandeliers and enough space for 200 guests. It's perfect for a spring wedding, Patricia had said. Your son and his fiancée have excellent taste. I had written the check that afternoon. $15,000 from the savings account Harold and I had built together, penny by penny, over decades of marriage. Money I had been saving for emergencies, for home repairs, for the uncertain future that comes with age. But I hadn't told Larry it was from me. Instead, I had asked Patricia to call him and say there had been a payment adjustment, and the deposit had been handled by the family account. I wanted it to be a surprise, a wedding gift that would show Emilia how much I cared about her happiness. Now, staring at her cruel words on my phone screen, I realized how foolish I had been. I thought about all the other little gestures I had made, hoping to win her over. The hand-knitted baby blanket I had made when they were trying to conceive, which I later found stuffed in the back of their linen closet. The family recipes I had carefully written out for her, which she had politely accepted but never used. The birthday cards I sent with thoughtful gifts, always receiving a text message thank you that felt more like an obligation than gratitude. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the group chat, this one from Larry. Sounds good, babe. Mom can be a bit much sometimes anyway. A bit much. My own son, agreeing that I was too much trouble to include in planning his wedding. I set down my teacup and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming early this spring, their red petals bright against the green leaves. Harold had always said roses were like love. They required patience, care, and the willingness to handle a few thorns. But what happened when the thorns were all you got? I picked up my phone and scrolled through the family chat, reading the messages I had missed. They were discussing flower arrangements, menu options, seating charts. All the details of a wedding I had secretly paid for, planned by people who considered me nothing more than a troublesome old woman. The realization hit me like a cold wave. They didn't want me involved in the planning, but they had no problem taking my money. They just didn't know it was mine. For the first time since reading Emilia's message, I felt something other than hurt. I felt a strange, quiet anger building in my chest. Not the explosive kind that makes you say things you regret, but the steady, determined kind that makes you think very carefully about what comes next. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, seeing the lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair that I had stopped coloring months ago. 66 years old. And I had spent the last 3 trying to earn love from people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. Maybe it was time they learned exactly what this troublesome old woman was capable of. I deleted the family group chat from my phone and finished my tea in silence. Tomorrow I would call Patricia at the Riverside Manor. There were a few details about the wedding contract that suddenly needed my attention. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Emilia's words echoed in my mind. The old woman just causes trouble anyway. By dawn, I was sitting at my kitchen table with another cup of tea, watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink. Harold always said I thought too much, that I should learn to let things go. But some things, once you really see them clearly, can't be unseen. The hurt had settled into something deeper overnight, like sediment in still water. I found myself remembering moments I had explained away, excused, or simply ignored, because I wanted so desperately to be part of my son's new life. It started almost immediately after Larry announced his engagement. I had been so excited to finally have a daughter, someone to share recipes with, to go shopping with, to build the kind of relationship I had always imagined. My own mother had passed when I was 28, and I had missed having that female bond in my life. The first time I invited Emilia to lunch, just the 2 of us, she had arrived 30 minutes late. "Sorry, Virginia," she had said, not sounding sorry at all. "I lost track of time at the spa. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. I had never been the type of woman who spent entire afternoons being pampered. Harold and I had worked too hard for too many years to develop those kinds of habits. During that lunch, I had tried to share some family stories, thinking she might be interested in Larry's childhood, in the traditions we might pass down to their future children. Instead, she spent most of the meal scrolling through her phone, occasionally making sounds that showed she wasn't really listening. "Larry was such a curious little boy," I had said, showing her a photo of him at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a frog he had caught by the pond. "He used to bring me creatures from the backyard every day, convinced I needed to see them." Emilia had glanced at the photo for maybe 2 seconds. "That's nice," she said, then immediately showed me a picture on her phone of a designer handbag she was considering buying. "What do you think? Too flashy?" I had swallowed my disappointment and admired the bag, even though it cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Then there was Larry's birthday last year. I had called him the week before to ask what he might like, offering to cook his favorite meal like I had done every year since he moved out. "Oh, Mom, that's sweet. But Emilia's already planned everything. We're going to that new French place downtown. You understand, right?" I understood that I wasn't invited to my own son's birthday dinner. When I had mentioned it to Larry later, he had sighed in that way that made me feel like I was being unreasonable. "Mom, it was just a small thing. You know how Emilia is about making reservations and all that. She had it all planned out." But the real moment of clarity had come at Christmas. I had spent weeks knitting Emilia a beautiful scarf in her favorite color, a soft lavender that matched the sweater she had worn to our first meeting. I had chosen the finest wool I could afford and worked on it every evening, imagining how pleased she would be with something made just for her. Christmas morning, she had unwrapped it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, how handmade. Thank you, Virginia." The way she said handmade made it sound like a flaw rather than a labor of love. Then she had set it aside and never mentioned it again. Later, when I was helping clean up, I found it stuffed behind the couch cushions like a forgotten napkin. But I had made excuses. She was young, I told myself. She wasn't used to homemade gifts. She grew up differently than Larry and I did. Her family probably bought everything from expensive stores. The excuses became a habit. When she forgot my birthday, I reminded myself that some people weren't good with dates. When she interrupted me mid-sentence to take phone calls, I figured she had important work matters to handle. When she rolled her eyes at my stories about Larry's childhood, I convinced myself she was just tired. The worst memory came flooding back as I sat there in the morning light. It was at Larry's company barbecue last summer. I had been so proud watching my son mingle with his colleagues, seeing how respected he was in his field. Emilia had been holding court with some of the other wives, and I had approached their group, hoping to join the conversation. "This is Larry's mom, Virginia," Emilia had said when she noticed me hovering nearby. But the way she said it, with that particular tone and a subtle eye roll, made it clear that my presence was an interruption rather than an introduction. One of the women had tried to be polite. "How wonderful that you could make it, Virginia. Do you live nearby?" Before I could answer, Emilia had jumped in. "Oh, she's always around. Lives about 20 minutes away and stops by constantly. You know how mothers can be." She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that excluded rather than included. I had stood there, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment, as the other women exchanged knowing looks. The message was clear. I was the overbearing mother-in-law who didn't know when to give her son space. The truth was, I visited maybe once every 2 weeks, usually when Larry invited me or when I brought over food I had made. I had been so careful not to be the kind of mother-in-law who overstayed her welcome. But somehow, in Emilia's narrative, my occasional visits had become constant intrusions. After that barbecue, I had started calling before stopping by, even though Larry had always told me I was welcome anytime. I began making excuses to leave family gatherings early, sensing that my presence made Emilia uncomfortable. I stopped sharing stories about Larry's childhood, noticing how she would change the subject whenever I brought up memories she wasn't part of. I had been trying so hard to make myself smaller, to take up less space in my son's life, that I had almost disappeared entirely. And now I knew what they really thought of me. The old woman who causes trouble. My phone rang, startling me from my memories. Larry's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But old habits die hard. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "Hey, Mom. I was calling to see if you wanted to come to dinner tonight. Emilia's making that pasta thing you liked last time." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had excluded me from wedding planning because I was too much trouble, but they still expected me to show up for family dinners when it was convenient for them. "I'm not feeling very well today," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. My heart was sick even if my body was fine. "Oh, well, maybe next week then. We should probably focus on wedding stuff anyway. You know how stressful planning can be." Wedding stuff. The wedding I had paid for but wasn't considered important enough to help plan. "Of course," I said. "I hope everything goes smoothly." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Harold had hung that clock 30 years ago, and it had been keeping perfect time ever since. Some things I thought were reliable. Some things could be counted on. But apparently, the love and respect of your own family wasn't one of them. I pulled out my address book and found Patricia's card from the Riverside Manor. There were definitely some details about the wedding contract that needed to be discussed. After all, the person paying for the event should have some say in how things were handled. For the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a determined one. I called Patricia at the Riverside Manor first thing Monday morning. My hands were steadier than they had been since reading that devastating message, and my voice was clear and purposeful. "Patricia, this is Virginia Whitmore. I'm Larry Whitmore's mother, and I believe we need to discuss some details about the wedding contract." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. How can I help you today?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I'd like to review the payment arrangements and make sure I understand all the terms, particularly regarding any changes or cancellations that might need to be made." Patricia's voice was professional but warm. "Absolutely. Would you like to schedule a meeting? I have some time this afternoon if you're available." An hour later, I was sitting in Patricia's office, a folder of documents spread across her polished mahogany desk. The contract was thicker than I remembered, filled with clauses and conditions I hadn't paid much attention to when I was focused on making my son's dream wedding possible. As you can see here, Patricia explained, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow, since you're the primary account holder and payment source, you have full authority over all aspects of the event. Any changes to catering, decorations, guest list, or timing need your approval. I nodded slowly, absorbing this information. And what about the couple? Do they have any decision-making power? They can make requests and suggestions, of course, but ultimately, the person paying has the final say. It's our policy to protect both the venue and the financial responsible party. I thought about this as I drove home, my mind turning over possibilities like stones in my hand. Larry and Emilia had no idea that every decision they were making about their wedding actually required my approval. They thought they were planning their perfect day when in reality I held all the cards. That evening, Larry called to update me on their progress, completely unaware that I already knew every detail. "Mom, you won't believe how smoothly everything is going," he said, his voice bright with excitement. "Emilia found this amazing caterer, and the flowers are going to be absolutely perfect. She has such good taste." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, not mentioning that Patricia had already called to confirm that the caterer Emilia chose was available, pending my approval. The venue coordinator has been so helpful too. It's like everything is just falling into place. Emilia says it must be fate. Fate. If only he knew that fate looked a lot like his mother writing a $15,000 check. Over the following weeks, I became a silent observer of my own generosity. I would sit in my kitchen, drinking tea and watching birds in the garden, while my phone buzzed with updates from the family group chat that I was no longer part of. Larry would call every few days to share their progress, never questioning why everything was going so smoothly, why every vendor was so accommodating, why their budget seemed to stretch further than expected. Meanwhile, I maintained my regular routines. I volunteered at the library on Tuesdays, had lunch with my neighbor Helen on Thursdays, and attended my book club every other Saturday. But now these activities felt different, like I was living a double life. On the surface, I was just Virginia, the quiet widow who kept to herself. Underneath, I was orchestrating the biggest surprise of my life. The first test came when Emilia decided she wanted to upgrade the floral arrangements. Larry called me, sounding stressed. "Mom, Emilia fell in love with these white orchids instead of the roses we originally picked. But they're more expensive and we're already stretching our budget. I hate to disappoint her, but I don't know what else to do." I let him worry for exactly 24 hours before Patricia called him to say there had been an adjustment in the package pricing, and the orchids were suddenly affordable. I could practically hear Larry's relief through the phone when he called to share the good news. "It's like a miracle, Mom. Everything is working out perfectly." The second test came with the music. Emilia wanted a string quartet for the ceremony instead of the piano player they had originally booked. Again, Larry called with the dilemma, and again 24 hours later, Patricia magically found a way to make it happen within their budget. I began to enjoy these little interventions. Each time Larry called with a problem, I knew I could solve it with a simple phone call to Patricia. Each time Emilia got something she wanted, I felt a strange satisfaction knowing that I was the one making her dreams come true, even as she dismissed me as a troublesome old woman. But the real entertainment came from watching Emilia's social media posts. She had blocked me from seeing most of her content, not realizing that Helen's daughter was friends with her, and showed me everything anyway. "Look at this venue I found for the wedding," she had posted, along with photos of the Riverside Manor. "It's absolutely perfect, and somehow we managed to get an amazing deal. I guess I'm just good at negotiating." Good at negotiating. I had to laugh at that one. Another post showed her excitedly displaying fabric samples for the table linens. When you have an eye for design, vendors just want to work with you. Everything is coming together so beautifully. An eye for design. She had no idea that Patricia was calling me before confirming every single one of her choices, making sure I approved of each decision before moving forward. The most irritating post came 3 weeks before the wedding. "Planning a wedding teaches you who really matters in your life. So grateful for my amazing fiancé and our tight-knit family. Sometimes smaller is better. Smaller is better." The tight-knit family that didn't include the woman paying for their celebration. I screenshotted that post and saved it in a folder on my phone, along with several others. I wasn't sure why I was collecting them, but something told me they might be useful later. The strangest part of this whole experience was how invisible I felt, while simultaneously being essential to everything that was happening. I was like a ghost haunting my own son's wedding, present in every detail but acknowledged in none of them. Larry and Emilia's conversations during family dinners became particularly surreal. They would discuss the wedding plans as if I weren't sitting right there, talking about vendors and decisions and logistics without ever mentioning that someone else was actually in charge. The cake tasting went so well, Emilia said during one dinner, cutting into the roast I had brought over. The baker was so accommodating. She said she rarely makes exceptions to her pricing, but something about our story must have touched her heart. Her story. The baker had called me personally to confirm the cake design and get approval for the upgrade to organic ingredients that Emilia had requested. The exception to her pricing was actually my willingness to pay the full amount up front. "You're so good at this wedding planning stuff," Larry said, reaching over to squeeze Emilia's hand. "I don't know how you manage to get such great deals on everything." I took a sip of water and bit my tongue to keep from laughing. If they only knew that their great deals were coming from a 70-year-old woman they considered too troublesome to include in their planning. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Emilia's mother called during one of our dinners. Emilia put the call on speaker, excited to share their progress. "Everything is going so smoothly, Mom," Emilia gushed. "It's like the universe is conspiring to give us the perfect wedding. Every vendor has been so helpful. Every detail is falling into place. I think it's because Larry and I are meant to be together." Meant to be together. The universe. I glanced at Larry, wondering if he ever thought about how convenient it was that his mother, who was supposedly too troublesome to involve in wedding planning, also happened to be absent from all the financial stress that usually comes with such events. But he was too caught up in Emilia's narrative to question it. In their version of events, they were the blessed couple whose love was so pure that the wedding gods smiled down upon them. It never occurred to them that their guardian angel might be sitting right at their dinner table, eating pot roast and listening to them take credit for miracles they had never created. As the wedding drew closer, I found myself in an increasingly surreal position. I knew every detail of the event better than the bride and groom did, since Patricia consulted with me on every decision. I knew which flowers would be in each centerpiece, what songs the string quartet would play, which wine would be served with dinner. I knew the timeline of the ceremony, the seating chart for the reception, even which bathrooms would have extra supplies for touch-ups. I was the invisible architect of their perfect day, and they had no idea I existed. 3 days before the wedding, I was watering my roses when my phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, and something in my chest tightened. We had gone over every detail multiple times in the past weeks. There shouldn't be any reason for her to call now. "Virginia, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but we have a small situation that requires your attention." I set down my watering can and sat on the garden bench Harold had built for our 10th anniversary. "What kind of situation?" "Well, it seems there's been some confusion about the payment authorization. The bride called this morning wanting to make some last-minute changes to the menu, and when I explained that I needed approval from the account holder, she became quite upset." I could imagine exactly how upset Emilia had become. She wasn't used to being told no, especially not when it came to her perfect wedding. What kind of changes did she want to make? She wanted to upgrade the dinner service to include lobster, and switch the champagne to a more expensive vintage. The additional cost would be about $3,000. When I told her I needed to speak with you first, she insisted that she and Larry were the ones getting married and should have the authority to make these decisions. $3,000. Casually requested 3 days before the wedding, as if money grew on trees. As if someone else's $15,000 hadn't been generous enough. "What did you tell her?" I explained our policy about the account holder having final approval on all changes. She seemed shocked that someone else was involved in the decision-making process. She kept asking who the account holder was, but of course, I couldn't share that information without your permission. I could picture Emilia's face, probably red with frustration, demanding to know why some mysterious person had control over her wedding decisions. The irony was delicious. She's probably calling Larry right now, I said. That's what I assumed. I wanted to give you a heads up before anyone contacted you directly. Patricia was right. My phone rang 15 minutes after I hung up with her. Larry's name flashed on the screen, and I could hear the stress in his voice before he even spoke. Mom, the weirdest thing just happened. Emilia called the venue about making some changes to the dinner, and they told her she needed approval from someone called the account holder. Do you have any idea what that's about? I took a slow sip of the iced tea I had made after coming in from the garden. That does sound strange, sweetheart. What kind of changes did she want to make? Just some upgrades to make the dinner extra special. But the venue coordinator was being really difficult about it. She wouldn't even tell Emilia who this account holder person is. It's like there's some secret person controlling our wedding. Some secret person. If only he knew how close to the truth he was. Have you tried calling them back? I asked, genuinely curious about how far they would push this. Emilia's been trying all afternoon. She's getting really frustrated. This woman Patricia keeps saying she needs written authorization from the account holder before she can make any changes. It doesn't make sense. We picked this venue. We've been working with them for months. But you haven't been paying for it, I thought but didn't say. That evening, Larry and Emilia showed up at my door unannounced. Through my front window, I could see them having what looked like an intense conversation in the driveway before they rang the bell. Emilia's face was flushed, and Larry kept running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was anxious. Hi, sweetheart, I said, opening the door with a smile. This is a surprise. Mom, we need to talk to you about something, Larry said, his voice tight with stress. I invited them in and offered tea, but Emilia remained standing, her arms crossed and her expression stormy. Mrs. Whitmore, she began, and I noticed she didn't call me Virginia like she usually did. We're having some issues with the wedding venue, and we were hoping you might have some insight. What kind of issues? Larry sat down heavily on my couch. It's the strangest thing, Mom. We've been working with this venue for months. Everything has been going perfectly. And now suddenly they won't let us make any changes without approval from some mysterious account holder. They won't even tell us who it is. I sat across from them, folding my hands in my lap. That does sound unusual. What kind of changes were you trying to make? Emilia's eyes flashed with irritation. Just some small upgrades to make the dinner more elegant. Nothing major. But this coordinator woman is acting like we don't have any authority over our own wedding. Have you paid your deposit? I asked innocently. That's just it, Larry said, looking confused. Everything was supposedly paid for through some family account arrangement, but now no one will tell us whose account it is. The whole thing is really strange. I watched Emilia pace around my living room, her frustration palpable. She was used to getting her way, used to charm and manipulation working in her favor. But Patricia was a professional who followed contracts to the letter, and the contract was very clear about who held the decision-making power. Maybe you should just enjoy the wedding as planned, I suggested gently. Sometimes trying to make last-minute changes just creates unnecessary stress. Emilia stopped pacing and stared at me. Unnecessary stress? This is my wedding day. It should be perfect. My wedding day. Not their wedding day. Not our wedding day. My wedding day. As if Larry was just an accessory to her perfect event. Of course you want it to be special, I said, maintaining my calm tone. But from what you've told me, it sounds like everything is already beautifully planned. You don't understand, Emilia said, her voice rising slightly. I've been planning this wedding for months. Every detail has been carefully chosen. And now some stranger has control over whether I can make improvements to my own celebration. Some stranger. The woman who had made her celebration possible was now being referred to as some stranger. Larry reached for Emilia's hand, trying to calm her down. Maybe we should just focus on what we have. The wedding is going to be beautiful regardless. But Emilia pulled her hand away. That's not the point, Larry. The point is that someone else is making decisions about our wedding without even consulting us. It's ridiculous. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 66 years. I'm sorry you're going through this stress so close to your big day. I'm sure it will all work out. That's it. Emilia snapped. That's all you have to say? Your son is getting married in 3 days, and his wedding is being controlled by some mystery person, And you think it will just work out? The room fell silent. Larry looked uncomfortable, caught between his wife's frustration and his mother's calm response. Emilia stood there breathing heavily, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from her pacing. Sometimes, I said quietly, the most important things in life can't be bought or upgraded or controlled. Sometimes you just have to trust that the people who care about you have your best interests at heart. Emilia's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means that maybe, just maybe, whoever is in charge of these decisions wants your wedding to be beautiful just as much as you do. They left shortly after that, with Larry apologizing for bothering me and Emilia remaining silent and sullen. As I watched them drive away, I wondered how long it would take them to figure out that the mystery account holder lived just 20 minutes away and had been quietly ensuring their perfect day for months. The next morning, Patricia called again. I'm afraid we have another situation, Virginia. The bride showed up at our office first thing this morning with her mother, demanding to see all the contracts and payment records. I had to call security. My teacup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. Security. She was quite agitated. She kept insisting that she had a right to know who was controlling her wedding. Her mother was equally upset, saying that this kind of secrecy was unacceptable, and that they would take their business elsewhere if we didn't provide answers. What did you tell them? I explained that our confidentiality policies protect all parties involved, and that I could only discuss account details with the authorized account holder. The bride's mother threatened to call their lawyer. Their lawyer? Over a wedding venue contract. The entitlement was breathtaking. Do you think they'll actually take legal action? I asked. Patricia chuckled. Over what? A venue enforcing its own contract terms? Any lawyer worth their fee would tell them they don't have a case. But Virginia, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to wait until the wedding day to reveal your involvement? This situation is causing quite a bit of stress for everyone involved. I looked out at my garden, where the roses Harold and I had planted were in full bloom. Patricia, how many weddings have you coordinated over the years? Oh, hundreds. Maybe thousands. Have you ever seen a bride demand to spend more of someone else's money 3 days before her wedding? There was a pause. No, I can't say that I have. Then I think we should stick to the original plan. Some lessons are best learned in front of an audience. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about Emilia showing up at the venue with her mother, demanding answers, threatening lawyers. The girl who had called me a troublesome old woman was now making scenes at businesses, disrupting their operations because she couldn't have her way. My phone buzzed with a text from Larry. Mom, can you call me? Emilia is really upset about this venue situation, and I don't know what to do. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't immediately respond to my son's request for help. Instead, I finished my tea, deadhead some roses in the garden, and took a long, peaceful bath. When I finally called Larry back 3 hours later, his voice was strained with exhaustion. Mom, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. I was busy, sweetheart. You know how us troublesome old women are always causing problems. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with just enough breeze to make the lake sparkle like diamonds. I stood at my bedroom window watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Today, after 3 years of swallowing my pride and 3 months of silent orchestration, the truth would finally come to light. I had chosen my outfit carefully the night before. An elegant navy dress that Harold had always said brought out my eyes, pearl earrings that had been my mother's, and comfortable shoes that would carry me through whatever the day might bring. I looked like exactly what I was, a dignified woman who had lived long enough to know her own worth. My phone had been buzzing since 6 in the morning with frantic messages from Larry, though I noticed none from Emilia. Apparently, their final attempt to resolve the mystery account holder situation had failed, and they were resigned to having their wedding controlled by forces beyond their understanding. Mom, I don't know what's going on with this venue situation, but please just come and enjoy the day. Larry's last text read. We can figure everything else out later. Figure everything else out later. If only he knew that everything had already been figured out months ago. I arrived at the Riverside Manor an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The grounds looked absolutely magnificent, exactly as I had envisioned when I first walked through with Patricia. The white orchids Emilia had insisted on were arranged in perfect cascades along the altar. The string quartet was warming up in the corner of the chapel, and the lake view beyond the stained glass windows was breathtaking. Patricia greeted me at the entrance with a knowing smile. "Are you ready for this, Virginia?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The bride and groom are in the bridal suite with their families, getting ready. They've been asking about the account holder situation all morning. I've been telling them that everything will be resolved before the ceremony begins. I nodded, feeling that strange calm deepen. And it will be. I made my way through the venue, observing the controlled chaos of wedding preparation. Photographers snapped candid shots of guests arriving. The catering staff put finishing touches on the reception tables, and everywhere I looked, I saw the fruits of my secret generosity. The imported linens Emilia had fallen in love with, the upgraded sound system for the string quartet, the premium bar service that would keep the guests happy throughout the evening, all of it paid for by the troublesome old woman who supposedly caused nothing but problems. I found a quiet spot in the chapel and watched as guests began to fill the pews. Harold's sister Margaret caught my eye and waved from across the aisle. My neighbor Helen arrived with her husband and gave me a thumbs up. She was one of the few people who knew what was coming, and she had been eagerly anticipating this moment for weeks. At exactly 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I approached Patricia. "I think it's time," I said simply. She nodded and disappeared into the back of the venue. A few minutes later, she returned with Larry, who looked handsome but stressed in his black tuxedo. Behind him came Emilia, stunning in her white gown but with tension written across her face. "Mrs. Whitmore," Patricia said formally, "I'd like you to meet the account holder for today's event." Larry looked confused. "Mom? What does that mean?" I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, and faced my son and his bride. The chapel had gone quiet around us, as if the very air was holding its breath. "It means, sweetheart, that I'm the one who paid for your wedding." The color drained from Larry's face. Emilia's mouth fell open, and for perhaps the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. "What?" Larry whispered. $15,000 for the venue deposit," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Plus all the upgrades, the orchids instead of roses, the string quartet instead of the piano player, the premium catering package, the imported linens. All of it. I paid for all of it." Emilia found her voice first. "That's impossible. Larry said his family had a special account for events like this." I turned to look at her directly. "I am Larry's family, Emilia. I'm his mother. And I wanted to give you both the wedding of your dreams." "But why didn't you tell us?" Larry asked, his voice cracking with emotion. For a moment I felt the old urge to make excuses, to smooth things over, to protect everyone's feelings. But those days were over. Because 3 months ago, I saw a message you didn't mean for me to see. A message where Emilia called me the old woman who just causes trouble, and where you agreed that I was a bit much sometimes. The chapel was now completely silent. I could see other family members straining to hear our conversation, guests turning in their pews to watch the drama unfolding at the altar. Emilia's face went white. "Virginia, I can explain." "No explanation necessary," I said calmly. "You made your feelings very clear. You didn't want the troublesome old woman involved in planning your wedding, so I respected your wishes. I stayed out of the planning, but I made sure you had everything you wanted." Larry looked stricken. "Mom, I had no idea you saw that message." "Emilia didn't mean." "Didn't mean what, Larry? Didn't mean that she thinks I'm a troublesome old woman? Or didn't mean for me to find out that's what she thinks?" The silence stretched on, heavy with 3 years of unspoken resentments and carefully hidden truths. I could see Emilia's mind racing, trying to find a way to salvage the situation, to spin this revelation into something less damaging to her image. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she finally said, her voice shaky but attempting confidence. "That message was taken out of context. I was just stressed about wedding planning, and sometimes people say things they don't mean." "Context," I repeated thoughtfully. "You're right, context is important. Let me provide some context for our guests." I turned to face the chapel full of family and friends, all of whom were now openly staring at our confrontation. 3 years ago, when my son announced his engagement, I was overjoyed. I looked forward to welcoming a daughter into our family, to sharing family traditions, to building the kind of relationship I had always dreamed of. I tried everything I could think of to connect with Emilia. I invited her to lunch, I knitted her gifts, I shared stories about Larry's childhood. I offered to help with wedding planning, to share family recipes, to be the mother-in-law who supported rather than interfered. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But apparently, all of my efforts were seen as the actions of a troublesome old woman who causes problems. My attempts to be included were viewed as intrusions. My presence at family gatherings was something to be tolerated rather than welcomed. I could see some of the guests nodding, recognition dawning in their eyes. These were people who had known me for decades, who had watched me care for Harold through his illness, who had seen me volunteer countless hours at the library and the community center. They knew exactly what kind of woman I was. So when I accidentally saw that message calling me a troublesome old woman, I made a decision. If Emilia didn't want me involved in planning her wedding, then I wouldn't be involved in planning it. But I also decided that I would still make sure my son had the wedding he deserved, even if I had to do it in secret. Emilia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, but I wasn't finished. Every time you got exactly what you wanted, the upgraded flowers, the string quartet, the premium menu, that was me making it happen. Every time you posted on social media about your amazing negotiating skills and how the universe was conspiring to give you the perfect wedding, that was me, working behind the scenes to make your dreams come true. Larry sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know you didn't, sweetheart. And that's part of the problem. You've been so focused on keeping Emilia happy that you forgot to pay attention to how your own mother was being treated. I turned back to Emilia, who was now sobbing openly. I want you to understand something, Emilia. I didn't do this to humiliate you or to ruin your wedding day. I did it because I love my son and I wanted him to be happy. But I also did it to teach you a lesson about the consequences of cruelty. Virginia, please, she whispered. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. For a moment, looking at her tears and hearing the genuine remorse in her voice, I felt a flicker of the old urge to comfort and forgive. But then I remembered 3 years of small humiliations, of being made to feel unwelcome in my own son's life, of being dismissed as nothing more than a troublesome inconvenience. Apologies are a good start, I said quietly, but they're not enough. You need to understand that respect isn't something you can turn on and off depending on your audience. You need to understand that the troublesome old woman you've been dismissing is a human being with feelings, with dignity, and with the power to make choices about how she's treated. The chapel was so quiet I could hear the lake lapping against the shore outside. Patricia stood nearby, ready to help with whatever came next, but this moment belonged to my family. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice clear and decisive. You have a choice, Emilia. You can have your wedding exactly as planned, paid for by the troublesome old woman you've spent 3 years dismissing. But if you accept that gift, you also accept that things are going to change between us. You're going to treat me with respect, include me in family decisions, and acknowledge that I have value as Larry's mother and as a person. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle.